I think that we are up to the Mishnah. Zok Tehillah Mishnah. Ve'elu treifas by. What is treifa by a knife? Zok to Gemara. Nukuvas haveshet, which is the same thing by a behema. As Rashi says, Afagav, the whole treifas, the behema connected with, even though we already went through all of the treifas by a behema, and the similar treifas by an oif are treifa. Hani itztricha le'la misni. Everyone that's listed in our Mishnah has a special reason why it needs to be listed. So we're going to go through Rashi and the Mishnah together. So there's Nekuvas Haveshet. So Rashi, Mishum Psukas HaGargeres. The reason why it mentioned it is more because of the Gargeres, because of the windpipe that we're talking about. It says Psukas HaGargeres. Vahu Itrich. Why do you need Psukas HaGargeres for? The loy tema ho v'chiyuv v'shaloif loy nofesh da kosher b'simen echad. Since it doesn't take much for a bird to be healthy, it doesn't take much for a bird to be killed, because even if you only shecht one simen, it will kill the bird. Ema maybe gargeres nami titar p'mashu. Maybe just like the veshet with a small hole. Possibles maybe huadin by the gargeris, by the kana of a bird, it should be mashu, kamash malam. Okay? It has to be psukas. Hiksa chulda al roisha, if a chulda hit the bird on the head, the hiksa chulda mishum dekatani mokum sha'oisa treifa, the hainu nekivas ha'krum. So it says hiksa chulda al roisha davke mokum sha'oisa treifa. Meaning Nikivas Krumo Shomach. Thank you very much. The loy tema titarv. I'm sorry?
A bird has a skull?
Of course. The loy tema titarv benishbar etzem. Below Nikivas Krum. Don't say that a bird is more fragile than a behema. And even if the Krum Shomach is intact, if merely the skull is broken, that would be enough to make it into a treifa. Loitemit titarv benishbar etzem below Nikivas Akrum kidamin lekaman be'oif shalmayim. By a water birds that live on the water, those birds actually have a very, very soft krum shalmoyach, and even if the skull breaks, we'll automatically say that the membrane is going to break and it's going to be a treifa. But other than that, the regular birds, if their krum shalmoyach is intact, even if the skull is broken, it's still going to be a kshera. Okay? Nikava korkavan, if the stomach got punctured, or nikva adakin, and now Rashi says, what's the chiddush of that by a bird? The nikva adakin mishum the kaboy lemis neseifa kabe'el ksheris yatsu b'nei me'el v'loy nikvu. There's going to be an example of the intestines were not punctured, but they came out of his body. It's not like a hernia type of thing, right? And there it's not going to be possible. That's why it mentions nikva adakin. What if the bird fell into a fire? V'nechemeu b'nei me'el, and its b'nei me'el got somewhat damaged. Nechmu kovtzu, they shriveled. Mach masa'or, because of the fire. V'nebcha marisa. So im yurekim psulim. If it's a part of the animal that's supposed to be red and turn green, which is the lave and the korkavan, they're supposed to be red and they turn green, then they're going to be possible. But in Medavim Ksherim, on the flip side, which the Mishnah doesn't say, if it's something that normally has a greenish color and it became red, that will also be a psul. We would say that was caused by the nechmur. Dorsa v'tarfa b'koisel. This means a person stepped on it. It's not talking about the drusas or hazav. A person stepped on it, or a person threw it against the wall. Oy sheritza behema, or a behema stepped on it. So the chashash here, the animal's still moving around, but the chashash is that maybe it's nisratsku evavrel, v'shasa me'es la'es, but it survived for 24 hours, and then the shachta, then it will be ksher. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, she'hakoel neh b'dvarim. Okay. Rav Shmuel Velevi, the Omri that say, how do you check to see if it's a broken skull? How do you make sure that the Krum HaMeach is still intact? What you do is machnis yodav bepiv shaloif. You stick your fingers into the mouth of the bird. What type of a bird that had a cholda that bit it? So you want to make sure that the Krum HaMeach was not punctured. You put your hand in and you push up against the top of its mouth to put pressure on the brain. As Rashi says, you push up at the top of its mouth, which puts pressure on the brain material that's above the mouth. That puts pressure on the brain matter. If you see some brain matter gooing out of the hole on top, that means your krum got punctured, and this is going to be a treifa shema nikav krum. I guess even that has to be done with some level of care. So ma'al jad lefnim uvedik im mevatzei tzva'ila treifa v'im lav kshera. So the Gemara,
after it's shechted or before it's shechted?
Of course, after it's shechted. Yeah, only after it's shechted. Remember, we had a machlekes. There's two krumen on the meach. There's a very thin one that wraps directly around the brain, and then there's a thicker krum that's adhered to the inside of what we refer to as the kedera, the pot, which is the bowl inside the skull that the brain is contained in. So if you hold ad the minkiv karma tasa, if you hold that it's only a treifa, if even the thin membrane around the brain matter itself has to be punctured, then it's very good. Because if it's punctured, the goo is going to come out. But if you hold it's going to be a treifa, even if only the outer membrane was punctured, but not the inner, maybe there's already a puncture in the outer membrane, and the reason why when you put pressure at the top of the mouth of the bird, that the brain matter is not gooing out, is because it's being held in by the thin membrane that's directly wrapped around the brain. If you're putting pressure on it, if there is no outer membrane, the thicker membrane that's intact, like Dovi says, the moment you push, it's going to pop. And that's going to be a problem. So that's why this test is a good test. Because this test would have to
then this question is actually better. Because no matter what, you're going to puncture the inner membrane.
If the outer membrane is punctured, the inner membrane is going to get punctured from your pressure. Yeah. So Zok to Gemara, Amaziri, Ein Bidika L'Chulda. If a chulda attacked the bird, you can't even check at all. It's impossible to check whether or not the Krum HaMoyach was damaged. Why not? We're talking about if it was bitten by a chulda. It has very, very thin needle-like teeth. So big deal. You could still see the impression of a tiny tooth mark. They don't go straight down. They go in at a very sharp angle, which means that where it punctured the outer layer of the skull is not the place where it's going to puncture the Krum HaMeach, because you're moving along, which means the hole in the Krum HaMeach will be plugged by the skull material, because everything's on the sharp angle. So the holes won't line perfectly up. Zok Rashi, so it's going to be taka treifa, but there's no way to test, because by pushing on it, since the hole doesn't go straight out, maybe the goo matter inside the brain will not leak out. And since it's not testable, we have to say that if a bird gets bitten by a chulda, we have to write it off automatically and say that it's a treifa. When he got in the hardah, the information that I gave you, meaning that if a chulda bites a bird, you cannot check anymore, and it's automatically a treifa. Tos hein biyadi, they're a mistake. You can check with your hand. So what is this bedika biyad and bedika b'mismar? Zogt Rashi, biyad kedemafarish le'ol machnis yodoi. That you could do, but there's another method that they used to check with. They would take a very sharp blade, like a needle, and you run it along the membrane, and if it was punctured, it would get caught up in the puncture hole, because it wouldn't be perfectly smooth. If it'll get caught up in the krum that's punctured, first they break open the whole skull, so they have the brain, and then they run the needle across that area where they suspect that there might have been a bite. But the problem is, the reason why you can't use the nail, because sometimes the nail will give it a false positive. You don't want to check in such a way where maybe the checking itself is what made the treifa, and then you're being mafsid mom yisrael, because really this animal was not a treifa. Rabbi Yochanan Amar, af b'mismar, you can even check with a nail. Uplukta de Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Nechemya, chad bodik b'yoda, one would be bodik b'machta, the chad bodik b'machta, and one would check it with a nail. So here this personifies the passion of Hilchos Treifus, because it's a double-edged sword. If you aser improperly, and if you matter improperly, you'll be Michael Treifus. So either side gets impassioned. Man the bodik b'yoda amelo the man the bodik b'machta ad mosa at mechala memoinem shel Yisrael. You're making false positives. Amelo man the bodik b'machta man the bodik b'yoda ad mosa at mechal Yisrael nevelus Treifus, because you're not doing a proper dika by just squeezing on it. Why would you say at mosa at mechal nevelus? It's not nevelus. It was geschachten. Elo treifus. It means until whether you're going to feed people treifus. Shema nikav krum shel moyach. Maybe the krum shel moyach was nikav, and you won't be able to tell. Zok to Gemara, we don't know who's who. One says you could be baidik even with a machat, and the other one says dafka biyad. Testayim, the Rabbi Yehuda, who the baidik biyada. The Tanya Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, I remember Shimon Rabbi Yehuda, baikin lechulda biyad. Avol lo b'mismar. That's pretty obvious. It's a pretty clear raya. We don't have to make any diyukim. He says it right out. Nishbar etzem, if the bone broke, meaning the skull, aval pishol nikav krum shel moyach, it's going to be possible. So tomorrow this time. So from the first half we have a raya. You both can be bodik biyad avol lo b'mismar. The problem is, then it says nikav. Nishbar etzem al bishlo nikav krum shel moyach is automatically a treif, and you can't be baidik. That directly contradicts that we just said that you could be baidik. Right? It says you could be baidik the krum, but if the skull broke, then there's nothing to be baidik for. Why not? That's exactly what the baidik is for. So tomorrow hagufa kasha. It's a stira minei in what we just quoted in the name of Rabbi Yehuda. Amrit beikin l'chol b'yad avol b'mismar. Amar islay b'dikusa. And then the day turns around, Badatani, and the Bible turns around and says, Nishbar etzem avol b'shaleinikav krum shel moyach. Amar islay b'dikusa. Zok Gemara, you're right. Seifa ostan la'of shel mayim. A bird brain is not so bad, but a swimming bird brain does shalatzura. So if it's a regular bird, that has a relatively durable krum shel moyach. Therefore, the testing, as we mentioned, would work fine. But if you're dealing with an oif shamayim, their krum was so soft that automatically it would just fall apart if the skull was punctured. However, ain't like krum, it doesn't have a krum. Ain't like krum, so of course it has a membrane around the brain. Al hol ukrumai rach. As Rashi says, hol ukrumai rach. Rashi says, the krum will not be able to maintain its integrity if the skull bone has broken. So now we're going to have a couple of repeats of what we just learned. Omar lo Rab Nachman Rab Anon Mar Omar Shmuel Bodik Biyada Umachsher Unechaven Omar Rav Bodik Biyada Umachsher. So Shmuel said you be Bodik Biyad, Rav says you Bodik Biyad as well. But Tani Levi, Levi said, Treifa Shemanu Chachamim Bebehema connected ba'oif. Yes, I oif. Nishbar etzem af pi shol nikrav krum shol moyach. So how could you, Rav and Shmuel, say that you can make a bedika when we have a broken skull? Levi quoted a brayta that says you cannot be beidik the membrane when the skull broke. The brayta that you're quoting from Levi is speaking of a waterfowl. How do you go so what would be a water bird? Does he give an example of what a water bird is? Like a swan, a duck?
Yeah,
Duck?
that's what I thought.
Okay.
What else do we eat? We don't eat swans. The swan goes
Okay.
The duck we eat, and that's
It's definitely not an ostrich.
as opposed to
Chicken.
chicken.
Yeah. There was once a chicken that it came to Rab Chana, there was a shayla by him.
Chicken came to
It was brought to him by the owner, but then the chicken came to him. And Nishbar Etzem v'lo nikrav kum shomaya chavoy v'achsher he was mashert. Amalei, how could you be mashert? V'atani Levi Treifa Shemanu Chachamim Bebehema connected b'oif. Except yes, Allah knoif Nishbar Etzem av b'shlo nikrav kum shomayach. Amalei asem b'oif shomayim. And this chicken that you're asking me is not a leif shomayim. However, in the kruma chadayda eloema hoel kruma rach. Rab Shizvi bodik b'shimsa. He would be bodik by holding it up in the sun. Rashi says, neged hashemesh, mistaka in your neck. If you hold it up in the sun, you would notice a subtle damage. She'or yafal bedika. That nusach is also used by earlier by also boitkin to chametz l'oraner. She'or yafal bedika. Right? Rabbi Yoma bodik b'maya. He was bodik with water. Rashi is going to explain exactly how that worked. There's two different methods to this test. Rabbi Acha bar Yaakov bodik Begila Dechitza. So let's see what these things are. So B'maya Rashi offers two pshatim. Either you squeeze all the moyach out of the brain, motzi kol hamoyach min hakrum derech pia. So you push it down on the head and it comes out of the. It'll come out of the spinal cord connection. It'll ooze all out. And then you fill it from the bottom, you fill the chut hashedra with water. If the water now comes out of the hole in the skull, what? That's right. Or another thing is, on top you put the water. You put water on top of the bird's head, right? And then you dump it out, and you see if the water came out perfectly clear, or if there's some brain matter in the water that's leaking out through the hole. Then if the water changes color, sitting there right on the membrane, if it changes colors, it means that membrane has been pierced, and some of its goo is coming out. Gil the Rashi says, that's the nail test, to see if it gets caught up on a piece of membrane. Our geese is ka'of shamayim damyan. So geese, what are geese? Not ducks. They're baby ducks. I don't know what is a goose.
Canada geese.
Oh, Canada geese. Oh,
It's a different animal.
So those are oif shamayim, and if there's any damage to the skull, it's game over. Zok Gemara Bacher. Nafla or if a bird fell into a fire and its innards got shriveled. So if it changes colors, then we have a problem, is what the Mishnah said. Zok Tehillah Gemara. Amar Berach Mishum Rav Yosy ben Yeshua Shir Yirakasan. The shear, how much has to be discolored for it to be a treifa? Keshir Nukuvason. The same size hole, a small little hole, is what's going to make the B'nai Ma'ayim a treifa, right? A hole in the B'nai Ma'ayim makes it a treifa. A tiny little spot of discoloration would have that same effect. Man Nukuvason B'mashu, if you Yukasan B'mashu. Ba'amina Rav Yosy ben Rav Yeshua ben Levi ben Rav Shimon Levi. Hayrika Koved Keneged b'nei ma'ayim mahu. What if the liver got green? Rashi says, Reisha echad shal kaveh toli keneged b'nei ma'ayin. One side of the liver is up against the b'nei ma'ayin, v'reisha echad l'mayla, the other exposure of the liver is to the north, towards the top of the animal. So what happens if the part that was connected with the ayim became green? Mahu, what's the halacha? Amalei treifa. It's going to be a treifa. If it's nigal mashu, it's possible. So if it became green, a mashu will be possible. But the liver, even if that part of the liver was completely removed, we learned if you have a gazais, it's enough. So why would we possibly the liver just because part of it became discolored? Amarava kagoin shayrika kaved keneged. I'm sorry. Okaven shayrika kaved keneged b'nei. Since that's what happened, b'yadua shenafla la'or v'nechmu b'nei ma'ayim utreifa. The problem isn't because of the liver, but the liver is a litmus test. It's the canary in the coal mine. It tells us that if the liver changed colors, it must be the b'nei ma'ayin were impacted as well, and they are going to be possible with a mashu. It's similar to when you found a nail in the kidneys or something. The Gemara is a shiloh. Did it come in through the windpipe, or did it come in through the digestive system, and it must have punctured the digestive system? He had a chicken. That there was a suffix on. He told him, "Yerekun havu, they are green, the achshura, and therefore I said it's going to be kosher." And he said it was kosher. I have not done yerekum psulim. So it depends which parts. That's where they're supposed to be red. They turn green. That's a problem. But what he found green wasn't a problem. But the other parts that are supposed to be green are going to be kosher, of course, if you find them to be green. He also had a problem with a chicken. They're red utreifa. If it discolored from what its natural state should be, it's going to be a treifa. Okay, gewaltig. Zot mer weiter. Amar Shmuel bar Chia, Amar Rav Mani, Adumen Shariku v'Sholkan. And now you cook them well, and cooking them, v'Chazru v'Dimu restored its original coloring. Ksherin is going to be kosher. My timer, it must be kutra ayalbuhu. I guess when it fell into the fire, smoke got into it, and by cooking it, it sort of washes out the smoke. As Rashi says, kutra ayalbu meikora, the achshav halach machmat hamayim areishchem, the hot water that you cooked it in will get rid of the smoke.
Reversing the status, I mean, when you put it in, it's straight.
No, so it's not because the smoke is there. If the actual tissue gets discolored, that's when it's going to be a treifa. But if there's just smoke inside that you rinse out, so the actual tissue is not affected. Amar Rab Nachman bar Yitzchak. But I guess the green wasn't really you couldn't. I guess you can't tell if it's the actual tissue is discolored or because there's smoke there. Once you rinse it out, it will reveal that.
The book by its cover.
Oh, gewaltig. Sagt mal weiter. Amar Nachman bar Yitzchak Avanan Nomar Adomin Shaloi Riku. What if it's Adomin Shaloi Riku? Vishokan Beriku Treifa. So this works both ways. You have to wash it out because maybe it has the wrong coloring because of the smoke. You have to see if the actual tissue changed colors.
You're risking treifing your pot, right? So if it doesn't turn, then the pot's straight.
But you might have to do it because it could be the suffix, but you're right. Besser verregnisht. My timer, iglei basayu. Zokt Rashi, what does that mean? Iglei basayu, cherfason tevade nechmeru. By washing it, it'll merely uncover what happened to this tissue. Amar Bashi, therefore, now you got yourself into trouble. Whenever you have an animal that fell into a fire and you're worried about nechmeru, then you automatically have to wash it as part of your testing for treifas. You don't have to. You know why? When it comes to Tarfus, we don't look for trouble. Zot Rashi, there's no obvious sign of trouble. You don't make a treif. If you happen to have cooked it, then you have a problem. So back to what Davi said, don't get yourself into trouble. If you cook, you're going to end up in hot water. Zot Gemara weiter. Dorsa v'tarfa b'koisel. We have the MDY video about that. Amar Rabbi Loza ben Antignos v'shum Rabbi Loza ben Yanai achasu v'achasu tricha b'dika. All of these cases do need b'dika. Alpha pisha shasam slice, because we said if you waited 24 hours, it's not in the Srashko Ve'ah, but you have to check it. The Sheva Nishbra Shedra of Difstak Achot, maybe some other issue occurred without reason. The following conditions are not treifus. Nikva gargaris, or shenistaga. Either there was a hole in it, or there was a slice in it, or hiksa cholda aroisha, or if the cholda hit it on its head, mokum she'ein oisa treifa, where it won't make a treifa, or nikav hazefek, if the zefek is on the way down the food pipe, before it hits the stomach, there's a pit stop along the way that's called the zefek. That's not considered from the B'nai Ma'ayin, so therefore the nikah won't be a problem. As long as it's not rave, I guess. Nikah zefek, Rabbi Omer, afilu nital, even if it was totally removed, even if the zefek was totally removed, it wouldn't be a problem. Yotzu afilu nital, yotzu b'nei me'ah. What happens if the chicken had a hernia? Its b'nei ma'im came out of its body, but the b'nei ma'im weren't damaged. V'nikfu. That's not going to be a treifa. That's one of the reasons why you actually told us earlier. It says nikfu b'nei me'ah to tell us, because we wanted to segue into this, dafkin nikfu b'nei me'ah, but not if he had a hernia. Nishtabru gapeha. If its wings broke, the bones of its wings broke, that's not going to be a treifa. Nishtabru raglea, or if its legs broke, Rashi says it's not anywhere. It's only if it was below a certain area. Raglea is min arkuva lumata. Oy afilu lumayla, but v'lo yotza etzem lechutz. If a bone broke, but there's no bone matter that pierced the outer skin, it won't be a problem. Nimratu knafa, Rashi says that's the noitza gedola shal kol gufa, the big feathers that it flies with, those were going to be kosher. Rabbi Yehuda Omer im not lahan noitza psula. If the lighter down that's all over the body, if that was taken off, that will already be possible. No, we had the zevek because by the kochim they would rip that out. The crop. They would rip that out of the bird by a chat, so the guy would throw it. The kohen would throw it very far.
The crop is the top of the head. This we're talking about a stomach.
Are you sure it's an O, not an A? By crop? Because that's basically what's inside there. The reason why they wouldn't...
It's on the way
down.
It's on the way down. That's called a crop.
Not a crown?
I thought that was called a crop.
I thought like wheat that's growing is called a crop. English is a very confusing language. But Al Kaponim, that's the first stop. That's the food. Yeah, it's on the inside, and that's why they would rip it out of the neck of the bird. Yeah, they would rip it out of the neck of the bird, and they weren't makrab that on the mizbeach. By Adola, they weren't makrab that on the mizbeach because that's gzela. Because the birds eat from gzela. Tadu Rabbanan, Ma'aseh Reb Shimei Reb Tzadok shehochu la'aver shana balut. They were going to sit on the bezdin to determine if they're going to be adding an adar sheni. V'shavsu ba'oinoi, and they spent Shabbos in oinoi. V'horu b'tarpachas, and they paskined by tarpachas kerebi. Tarpachas is if the womb was gone, if the womb was removed or damaged, they paskin like Rebbe bezefek. So this is a very unclear thing. For harukat harpachas kerebi bezefek. Were they paskin by tafachas kerebi, or did they paskin by tafachas like Rebbe paskin by zefek? But what did Rebbe say by zefek? So we're very confused over here. So what exactly is this story over here? Are you going to tell me that they're machmer, because we learned nitlaim is not a problem? Are you going to say that they pass l'chumra, that even the uterus that was taken out would be a treifa, kerebi bezefek, like Rebbe, is it Harvard Lisura kerebi, and bezefek latera, but if the zefek was damaged, he passed in latera like our Mishnah, or maybe Harvard Tarpachas latera kerebi bezefek. They were meko by Tarpachas, like everybody does, just like Rebbe did by Zefek. But we're not discussing latera by Zefek. But of a kerebi bezefek loisvilu. Rabbi paskins if the zefek is damaged or nitel, it's going to be kosher, and they paskin that way legabe the tefachas. But legabe the zefek, we don't know yet if they are moida to Rabbi to our Mishnah. So it's very unclear what it was that happened over there. Amar Rabbi v'temer b'shuba Levi gago shel zefek, the top of the zefek is nidain kiveshet, meaning the part that tapers. Which part of that? The part of the zefek that tapers into a tube area, that tapering section is also part of the veshet, and therefore, if it's nikev, it would be posel b'mashu. Yotu b'nei the kishkes came out. Amar Shmuel bar Yitzchak leishonu el shaloi hipach behen. That we say, if the kishkes are intact, the animal's kosher, that's if when you put the kishkes back in, you put them back in exactly the same format that it was there. If you moved anything out of position, treifa. Now go remember how to put exactly the treifa. It's not going to happen, right? You saw how long these kishkes are. You think you're going to be able to manipulate it back in exactly the same way? The chsiv, everything has its place. Who created us? And everything he gave a proper base, a proper place to excuse me. Melamed Shabbat Kadosh Baruch Hu Koordinus Ba'adam, bases, like Rashi Loshem Eskir Veskanoi, bases in a person that basically mounts. So everything should be properly mounted, like an engine mount. Shem Nepach Echaz Mehen Enu Yachal Lichyos. If your engine mount is upside down, the engine's going to fall out. Tanya Hayar Meir Omer, Hu Ascharei Necha, Kacha Dechulu Bay, we're a city, Shakol Bay, that has everything in it. It's fully self-contained. Ve'al Knesset Yisrael Namar, this pasuk is referring to the Klal Yisrael, Shakol Meishleim Mehen, all of their leaders are internal, they don't have to import leaders from other nations. Like Persia had to do with Queen Esther. We have our own leaders, our own homebred leaders, v'lo me'amacher. K'kacha d'chula bay, mimenu kohanov, its kohanim come from amongst them, mimenu neviav, mimenu sarov, mimenu malachav, and now we're going to change to have mimenu its own missiles. It's going to produce its own defense mechanisms, so it shouldn't be relying on anybody else. Everything is homebred. Shenemar, Mimenu Pina Mimenu Yesed, which the Navi says about Klal Yisrael, Mimenu Pina Mimenu Yesed, Mimenu Keshes Mochama, Mimenu. So Keshes Mochama means they make their own weapons, right? Mimenu Yetze Kol Noigesh Yachol. So Klal Yisrael is completely independent. Now here is a Geshmaka story. How are you going to put kishkes back in? You have no idea how it goes back in. You put them wrong, the animal's dead, right? So Ahu Ramah, there was a Roman guy. The Chosjel Ahu Gavra, he saw Melech Rachman son, the Nefal Me'igro La'ara, he fell off a big roof, he fell off a high area, and he plotted at the bottom, he splotted at the bottom. And Poke Kreise, his stomach burst open, V'nafik Mayane, and his intestines were laying over there. Now he knew if he puts it in the wrong way, this guy's finished, right? We just learned that it has to go in the right way. So how do you fix this guy? So what did he do? He took the son of this Nebuch victim, V'shachne kamei b'achizas einayim. He made it look like he was killing his son, so that the father should groan and gasp. He groaned and gasped the father, and that naturally sucked his b'nei ma'ayin back into the exact position that they needed to be put into. And once he sucked his intestines into quickly, they called a surgeon to sew him back together, and he lived, and he was happy and healthy.
It works for hiccups also.
So, it works for hiccups as well. So, well, this guy, I would say, had a hiccup in his life. So I just want to show you a Geshmaka video.
What is the Taija by Yochanan Nefesh?
And he gave us a base. It's a Lashon base. Yeah, Hashem gave us a base. So let's see where we're up to over here. Here we are. You ready for this one? He just fell off. And his kishkas fell out.
Stop paying $500 for stiff blazers. The cotton. Peak knit blazer from Quinn's.
Somebody's getting paid to do this.
Then we have another one.
More than one person, there's a team, you know.
We have another
Imagine how
one.
they sit around on a couch and they all should like we got over. Oh, this is great.
I can't find the other one. The other one was about,
So all Americans, anyway, these guys. All Americans.
yeah, with the chicken flying against the wall, but I can't
We're all
find it.
Americans that are doing this?
Look at some.
Okay, gewaltig. Okay, we should have a gebringt to two.
When I went to visit Haki Handler in Ramat Channel, I asked him, like, are there any